Welcome. This presentation reviews multicultural and decolonizing approaches to career counseling, from foundational models to emerging paradigms. We will examine how the field has moved beyond culture-adapted Western theories toward frameworks grounded in community values, structural critique, and diverse epistemologies. Our goal is to map this literature clearly and connect it to practice. The literature identifies 7 distinct multicultural career counseling approaches, varying in target population specificity and procedural operationalization. The CACACM, expanded with metacognitive processes by Byers-Winston and Fuad, provides a structured iterative process for racial and ethnic minority clients. The CC is a semi-structured cross-cultural intake protocol. The systems theory framework addresses individual, social, and environmental contexts simultaneously. The cultural formulation approach brings a relational and feminist lens to international student counseling. Constructivist and narrative approaches center meaning-making for non-dominant groups. Cultural praxis addresses athletes' careers across global and marginalized contexts. Together, these models represent the field's primary efforts to place culture at the center of career counseling practice. Despite their differences, these approaches share 4 foundational commitments. First, all require counselors to examine their own cultural biases and worldviews as a prerequisite for practice. Second, all integrate family, community, and cultural values into career planning, rejecting individualistic Western defaults. Third, all attend to discrimination, structural barriers, and social injustice as forces that shape career access. Fourth, all challenge assumptions of linear career progression and the separation of work from family and community life. These shared commitments form the ethical foundation of multicultural career counseling, regardless of which specific framework a counselor draws on in practice. The theoretical foundations underlying these approaches are themselves diverse. The CC draws from both multicultural counseling and therapy and social cognitive career theory, allowing universal and culturally specific dimensions to coexist. The CACCM draws on APA multicultural guidelines and metacognition, centering counselor self-monitoring at every step. Constructivist approaches, as applied by Pierce and Gibbons with African refugees, are rooted in postmodern philosophy and humanism, emphasizing client meaning-making. The systems theory framework offers a systemic lens across multiple contextual levels. The cultural formulation approach integrates relational theory and feminist perspectives to examine intersections of gender, ethnicity, and social class. The culturally appropriate career counseling model was originally developed by Fuad and Bingham in 1995 and expanded by Byers-Winston and Fuad in 2006 with metacognitive processes. It is among the most procedurally specified multicultural career counseling models available. The model progresses through 7 iterative steps, from relationship building to cultural assessment to goal setting, implementation, and evaluation. 2 features distinguish it from standard career counseling. The process is explicitly iterative. Counselors revisit steps as new cultural information emerges. And metacognitive self-reflection bridges each step, keeping the counselor's own cultural processing visible throughout. This combination of structure and reflexivity makes the CACCM particularly useful in training and supervision contexts. The Career and Culture Interview was developed by Ponterado, Rivera, and Tsuyoshi in 2000. It is the most operationally specified approach in this literature, structured as a flexible, semi-structured intake protocol. The CC draws from both multicultural counseling and therapy and social cognitive career theory, allowing attention to cultural identity and worldview alongside environment, personal attributes, and behavior. A distinctive feature is its emphasis on conscientization or critical consciousness of social injustice as a central counseling component. The CC is broadly applicable, designed for culturally diverse clients generally, not limited to racial or ethnic minorities, making it one of the most universally applicable tools in multicultural career counseling. A key design choice in multicultural career counseling models is the level of population specificity. Population-specific models address culturally particular dynamics with precision, attending to collectivist family norms, resettlement trajectories, or specific racialized histories. The trade-off is that adaptation is required when working with different populations. Broadly targeted models offer flexibility across diverse clients, but they risk superficiality if cultural specifics are not adequately addressed in practice. Effective counselors develop the capacity to use both, matching the level of specificity to the client's context and presenting concerns. Neither approach is universally superior. What matters is the counselor's ability to assess which fit is needed. Beyond the 7 foundational models, the broader literature organizes into 9 overlapping traditions of culturally responsive and decolonizing career counseling. These traditions range from indigenous community-grounded models centering land, kinship, and cultural epistemologies, to advocacy frameworks, to narrative and constructivist methods, to ecological meta-theories. Each diagnoses a different problem in mainstream career theory and proposes distinct solution mechanisms. This breadth reflects the genuine diversity of context the field is trying to address, but it also means counselors must develop fluency across multiple traditions. Familiarity with the full landscape helps practitioners select and adapt frameworks thoughtfully rather than defaulting to the most familiar approach. The 9 traditions vary in how they identify what is wrong with mainstream career theory and what change they call for. Some traditions focus on indigenizing existing practice within established counseling structures. Others call for structural transformation, including advocacy, decolonization, or fundamental reorientation of career theory. Still others emphasize narrative methods, ecological systems, or decent work frameworks. A pattern emerges across all 9, a critique of individualism and a call for contextual, relational, and justice-oriented alternatives. This convergence signals a maturing consensus about what multicultural career counseling must address. Indigenous approaches begin from a foundational claim. Western career guidance models are structurally misaligned with Indigenous communities' value systems, creating real gaps in service delivery. 3 frameworks illustrate this tradition. The Badgey Holistic Framework integrates spirituality, communal responsibility, and environmental preservation as core career development logics. The First Nations Career Life Planning Model, developed by McCormick and Amundsen, structures career counseling as a communal process emphasizing connectedness, balance, roles, gifts, and values. Afrocentrism, proposed by Cheatham, conceptualizes career behavior relative to a cultural reference group's values rather than against a Western normative standard. Decolonial frameworks move beyond cultural sensitivity to question the epistemological foundations of career counseling itself. Williams and Utsi warn that cultural sensitivity can become futile and rhetorical when deeper power relations remain intact. Neoliberal skills agendas reproduce colonial hierarchies by defining employability in ways that serve institutional interests over community well-being. Several frameworks respond directly. Wark Hinton's decolonial praxis for work-integrated learning equips students for holistic career development. Mohammed and Bao's 4-dimensional framework reframes career knowledge across knowing, doing, being, and feeling. Manning's decolonial feminist theory creates space for Global South women as visible knowledge producers. Each moves decolonization from rhetoric into structural practice. Social justice approaches treat career development as shaped by discriminatory social, political, and economic conditions. Advocacy is not optional in this frame, but an ethical imperative built into counseling practice. Counselors are called to advocate at multiple levels, with individual clients, in group settings, within institutions, and at the societal level. Toporek proposes integrating career counseling competencies, advocacy competencies, and multicultural counseling competencies into a unified framework. The Decent Work Framework links career counseling to labor and human rights principles. Operationalizing decent work within individual sessions remains challenging, but it represents an important alignment of career counseling with broader social justice commitments, positioning counselors as agents of structural change. Constructivist and narrative approaches argue that static career matching models have become less meaningful as both people and workplaces change continuously. The shift is from trait matching to dynamic meaning making. The cultural formulation approach, developed by Arthur and Popadiuk, organizes cultural influences on career issues, interventions, and the Working Alliance. Narrative group counseling, documented by Clark and colleagues, invites students to develop career and life stories incorporating cultural values, family considerations, and multiple life roles. The cultural preparation process model conceptualizes culture as the central mediator of career engagement, not a background variable. Together, these approaches treat career stories as inherently shaped by cultural context. Ecological and systems perspectives challenge what Arthur and McMahon call parts in isolation thinking, offering holistic frameworks that situate individuals within nested contexts. The systems theory framework organizes three interacting systems: the individual system, encompassing personal attributes, values, and beliefs; the social system, including family, peers, community, and culture; and the environmental system, incorporating historical, political, economic, and global influences. Ecological career counseling extends this further by conceptualizing dynamic person-environment interaction and explicitly accounting for sociocultural realities and multiple identities. Bronfenbrenner-based ecological models developed through qualitative research with successful minority women integrate sociocultural influence layers that standard trait factor models do not address. Psychology of working theory, developed by Duffy and colleagues, reframes career psychology around an equity concern. Most career theories address only those with access to vocational choice. PWT broadens this scope to everyone who works, treating work as a central human activity fundamental to survival and social participation. The framework is explicitly anchored in structural inequities, building on vocational psychology, multicultural psychology, intersectionality, and the sociology of work. Marginalization and economic constraints are treated as primary forces, not background variables. Kenny and colleagues argue that PWT has transformative potential for career education, directing counselors toward structural analysis alongside individual planning and toward equity as a core counseling goal. Feminist and intersectional frameworks illuminate career dynamics facing women, particularly women of color, and the structural forces shaping their experiences. The Outsiders Within concept, drawing on Black feminist standpoint theory, reframes Black women's marginal institutional position as a potentially generative source of critical insight. The multiple self-referent model addresses personal, social, and historical dimensions of self-concept formation in African American women. Relational cultural theory, applied by Storley and colleagues, centers growth-fostering relationships as a culturally responsive career pathway for female adolescents of color. Hackett and Betts's self-efficacy model demonstrates how socialization can undermine women's career efficacy beliefs, linking structural gender dynamics directly to individual career behavior. The literature on culturally responsive career counseling converges on four core principles. First, ongoing cultural competence and humility. Counselors develop these continuously throughout their careers, not at a single training point. Second, value alignment. Assessment and guidance align with clients' cultural values and lived experiences. Third, contextualized inclusion. Counselors attend to gender, race, ethnicity, language, socioeconomic status, and national or regional context throughout every aspect of the counseling process. Fourth, technology and system-level integration. Culturally responsive approaches incorporate digital tools and systemic supports when they strengthen access and alignment. These principles function together. Strong practice in any one dimension does not substitute for attention to the others. Cross-cultural narrative and life design approaches offer counselors frameworks for work with clients navigating multiple cultural contexts. Savika's life design principles link meaning-making, adaptability, and agency to culturally situated life stories. Marie extends this through a career counseling framework foregrounding ecological awareness and cultural contextualization for Anthropocene-era workplaces. Lee and colleagues' work with Chinese international students highlights the need for culturally sensitive report building and outcome-oriented interventions tailored to client expectations. Practical implications include using narrative interviewing tools adaptable to clients' backgrounds, employing culturally responsive assessment rather than universal instruments, and balancing global evidence-based methods with local cultural adaptation to avoid wholesale policy transfer across diverse contexts. Technology offers expanding possibilities for culturally sensitive career guidance, but careful design is required to avoid reproducing cultural bias. The Crackbot, developed by Code, integrates AI-driven career counseling within learning management systems to deliver personalized, culturally adaptive guidance with emphasis on user-centered design, ethical transparency, and local culture. Talib and colleagues stress localizing language, cultural content, and data privacy protections while leveraging large language models for personalized career pathways. Multiple authors emphasize a human-in-the-loop design principle. AI should augment counselor judgment rather than replace it. Ongoing evaluation is necessary to prevent culturally incongruent or biased guidance from reaching clients through automated systems. Career counseling models have expanded beyond individualistic, Eurocentric paradigms toward culturally responsive and decolonizing approaches that attend to power, race, ethnicity, indigeneity, immigration status, and historical trauma across all life stages. This expansion matters because career development does not begin in adulthood. The values, beliefs, and structural constraints that shape career choice take root in childhood and are reinforced or challenged across the full lifespan. Decolonizing approaches recognize this developmental arc, insisting that culturally responsive career counseling must be embedded across every life stage, rather than applied only at visible transition points like college entry or job change. The literature maps culturally responsive approaches across 4 life stages: for children and adolescents, liberatory school counseling centers home place, and culturally sustaining practices. Narrative approaches help isolated youth reconstruct positive career identities. For young adults, multicultural competence is essential for international students and marginalized populations. Intersectional frameworks address overlapping identities, and trauma-informed counseling integrates adverse childhood experiences and PTSD considerations into vocational planning. For midlife adults, Modalski's research shows relational connections enhance career transitions while disconnections hinder them. Life design counseling provides culturally grounded support for mid-career change. For older adults, cultural values shape retirement decisions, and counselors must recognize ageism alongside racism and sexism as structural forces constraining options. Trauma-informed career counseling, proposed by Liu and colleagues, integrates trauma histories, adverse childhood experiences, and PTSD considerations directly into vocational planning for youth and young adults. The approach rests on 5 principles. Safety involves creating physically and emotionally secure counseling environments. Trust requires transparent, consistent therapeutic relationships. Collaboration centers shared decision-making and power sharing. Empowerment foregrounds client strengths and self-determination, and choice maximizes client agency throughout career planning. Together, these principles bring trauma-informed practice into career counseling itself, acknowledging that trauma history shape career trajectories in ways that standard vocational models do not address. For counselors working with youth who have experienced significant adversity, this integration is not optional. Relational and collectivist approaches reposition career counseling as helping people construct meaningful lives in relationship rather than isolated careers, emphasizing holistic narratives, family and community involvement, and attention to social justice. Relational cultural theory centers growth fostering relationships, mutual connection, and social justice as foundations for career development and wellness work. Life design counseling, developed by Savikas and colleagues, co-constructs life stories as lifelong and contextually grounded. Lowe's research with Asian American students found that a collectivist-oriented counseling stance honoring interdependence and family significantly increased perceptions of cross-cultural competence compared to individualist approaches, providing direct evidence that relational framing matters to clients from collectivist backgrounds. Narrative and constructivist career counseling bring culture, race, and histories of oppression into the center of career conversations rather than treating them as background factors. Group narrative work, documented by Greer Reed and Ganuza and by Clark and colleagues, normalizes diverse students' experiences by centering collective meaning-making. Sensoy Britick and Britick develop liberation-oriented narratives that identify oppressive societal stories about minoritized youth and build counter-narratives of persistence. In post-colonial African contexts, Murray argues that narrative assessment is essential where people have experienced decades of colonial suppression because imported tools carry assumptions that simply do not apply. Pierce and Gibbons apply constructivist counseling with refugees, linking career explicitly to social justice. 5 cross-cutting themes emerge across all traditions reviewed: First, all challenge decontextualized matching assumptions and individualistic models that ignore family, community, and structural context. Second, communal components including connectedness, balance, and relationality are operationalized, not merely named, across Indigenous, decolonial, and feminist traditions. Third, structural barriers are treated as constitutive of career outcomes, not peripheral. Fourth, narrative work serves as a cultural bridge, enabling locally resonant methods in non Western contexts. Fifth, the field maintains an ongoing tension between cultural adaptation and genuine decolonization, with persistent calls for guidance models genuinely grounded in Indigenous values rather than adapted from Western frameworks. The literature surfaces four central tensions: Western adaptation versus Indigenous origin. Can adapting constructivist methods substitute for community grounded guidance, or does decolonization require building from Indigenous epistemologies? Competence checklists versus decolonial critique. Multicultural competencies may not address deeper structural power relations. Operationalizing decent work. Translating human rights principles into everyday sessions remains difficult. Specificity versus generality. When is the appropriate unit of cultural grounding a specific community's epistemology rather than a broader decolonial praxis? Research priorities include comparative effectiveness studies, longitudinal assessments of co-designed interventions, development of evaluation metrics reflecting community-defined success, and expansion of intersectional analysis into actionable practice strategies. Across all traditions examined, from the CACACM's seven-step process to Indigenous communal planning models to the psychology of working theory, a convergent critique of Western-centric, individualistic career counseling emerges, alongside a persistent call for empirical validation. The CCHI and CACCM offer the most procedurally specified and ready-to-implement tools. The systems theory framework and constructivist approaches offer broader conceptual orientation. Culturally responsive counseling shows meaningful effects across diverse populations, particularly on career decisions, self-efficacy, and career awareness. The field's primary need now is intervention research testing whether the shared elements across traditions, including counselor self-awareness, worldview integration, and systemic barrier attention, account for most of the variance in client outcomes.